In the early hours of Monday the 24th of January this year, a young man hanged himself in a toilet in a homeless shelter under a bridge. He was a resident of Culemborg 1, a safe space allocated by the City of Cape Town to accommodate the burgeoning number of street-based and homeless communities. His name was Llewellyn Fredericks. He was 36, an addict, and he had lost hope.
The only thing that they are aware of is that the guy's an addict, and that's the box that they keep him in. They don't take the time to actually find out anything further or what's going on inside the guy's mind, you know.
Musician, sound engineer and artist Chaz Rogers has lived at the safe space for 2 years. He and Llewellyn were friends.
He told me that his mom passed away when he was pretty young. Came out of an area that was full of abuse and stuff like that, and you know, he didn't really talk much about his past. But one thing I can tell you, that he was a really nice guy and he had a lot of respect. I saw him the day before and I saw that something wasn't right with him. He just he'd lost it. He'd just given up.
When I first met Chaz Rogers in 2021, he acknowledged that personal choices had derailed his life and he was determined to get it back on track.
Sometimes you have to lose it all to get it all back. I've made a lot of awesome connections with people on the street and in the space where I live. They are beautiful people. You cannot judge anybody for the circumstances that they are in, because you might not know who that person is.
Now, in the wake of his friend's suicide, he is too starting to despair of ever breaking free of the cycle of homelessness and hopelessness into which so many have sunk.
It's very demeaning, to put it to you that way. It's no human being wants to live under those conditions, and there is no way out because there is no structure. There is no system that's helping anybody out. Yeah.
Did you get any kind of counseling, any kind of...
No, there's no counseling about anything there.
A 2021 study by several NGOs shows that 71% of homeless people have been on the streets for more than a year, that 6% have serious mental health conditions, 64% have substance addiction, 65% suffer from associated mental health and addiction disorders, and that more than 50% of street-based communities are chronically homeless.
This is severe trauma. This is mental health. This is escaping severe dysfunction in the home environment. So the services that are rendered or need to be rendered to street-based communities need to be specialized.
But it's not just the loss of hope that afflicts those on the margins of society. On the 14th of January this year, 48-year-old Dumisani Jokro, a member of a small street-based community in Rondebosch, was shot dead by a law enforcement officer. This was during an argument over a fire that had been lit for cooking in the street. According to witnesses, he had not even been involved in the fight and was simply on his way to relieve himself when the officer opened fire. The officer has since been charged with murder.
This officer looked away and just shot. So he could have shot anybody. And the thing is, Dumasani wasn't even part of the argument. You understand? And it was just, you know, just coming there and feeling, you could sense the sadness. You could sense that loss. Because he wasn't just a person there. He was like, he was a provider for them. They're a small community, they're about 12, 14.
Formerly homeless for 10 years, Karen Roeder rose to prominence when, assisted by human rights lawyers, she, together with several street-based communities, successfully sued the city after law enforcement confiscated their belongings and evicted them. Yet the city continues to appeal the court findings despite the Disaster Management Act, in terms of which evictions were prohibited during the COVID lockdown.
No one can prepare you for homelessness. No one can prepare you for the street. No one can prepare you for the hell that you experience while you're in homelessness. I do believe homeless lives don't matter. At least it don't matter to the city.
Recently elected Cape Town Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis covered the costs of transporting Dumisani's body to his family for burial in the Eastern Cape.
When the mayor announced that he was going to help, you wouldn't believe how happy I was just knowing that mother was going to see her son, even though it wasn't in those circumstances, she was going to bury her child where he belonged.
But the management of Kulenborg refused to disclose to the media the details of Llewellyn's funeral, and most of his shelter friends were none the wiser. Discarded in life, he was barely respected in death.
If those in power would take the initiative to recognize the value of street people, the changes would be amazing to society. You know, the difference it would make if they are acknowledged, because all they need is opportunity.
Local governments aren't constitutionally mandated to deal with homelessness. That is the role of the national and provincial departments of social development. But in the wake of the COVID-19 National Disaster Management Act, municipalities are also responsible for homeless people on the streets and for providing alternative accommodation.
We as a city and as a local government and as a caring city know that we can't wait for other spheres of government to address a need that we're feeling very regularly on the ground. The City of Cape Town from the very beginning said we want to do more with our money. We want a sustainable option for our homeless people, and so the safe spaces is the route that we went.
Dr. Zahid Badruddin was formerly in charge of the city's health and community services. That position is now held by Patricia van der Ross, and the new mayor of Cape Town has pledged to improve governance of the homeless.
I want to be clear that good governance is and will remain a non-negotiable in Cape Town, precisely because we are committed to serving the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society.
But historically, the DA has tended to take an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to those on the margins of the city. For example, in 2007, to deal with the growing housing backlog, it constructed the notorious Blikkiesdorp, a temporary relocation camp far from the city. Blikkiesdorp subsequently became a permanent dumping ground for the homeless. Then, in the wake of COVID, there was Strandfontein, hastily built to accommodate the city's homeless during the lockdown in 2020.
We were only there for 6 weeks. It felt like, no, never mind 6 years, that's not even long enough. That's how bad it was.
The inhumane conditions were condemned by the Human Rights Commission, Doctors Without Borders, and several NGOs. Its homeless clientele formed the Strandfontein Homeless Action Committee and took the city to court, forcing the closure of the camp.
It all has to do with tenders. They don't care whether it's about homeless people, etc. It's about that tender and who's getting that tender, and city managers are involved and the directors are involved.
Now, the Special Investigation Unit has exposed corruption in the camp to the tune of over 42 million rand in irregular expenditure, implicating both the service providers and the city. To date, no one has been held accountable.
We have had 17 years in Cape Town of DA, and I'm sure it's the same with the ANC anywhere else and wherever anybody's governing. People get The minute that you get it for a long period of time, the corruption sets in.
And after Strandfontein, 3 safe spaces were designated for the city's homeless. But these have also been mired in controversy. First, there was Culemborg 1, under the bridge where Llewellyn Fredericks killed himself. It has been managed by an outsourcing company called Matdock. Matdock has been subsidized by the city to manage the site since 2018 and officially won the tender for the site in 2020, worth 25 million over 3 years. The living conditions here are appalling.
This is what you call social development. It's really developing, isn't it? Look at it.
Then there is Culemborg 2, next door to Culemborg 1. The company that won that tender, also worth 25 million over 3 years, is an obscure entity called Take Note Trading. In fact, in previous episodes, Special Assignment exposed that it is only a shell company registered to a Mr. Imram Yaqub in Rondebosch East, belonging to the Yaqub Family Trust. Like Matdock, Take Note has long been grabbing pieces of the city's lucrative tender pie.
When we started talking about the Safe Space 2, that was about to be also handed over to another service provider. Prior to that, electrical collecting for the city, and 2 years ago also events management, and now suddenly this. So the connection was, okay, there's obviously a connection here because they were doing exactly the same thing. That's how they moved into this, the whole picture together.
Then there is Paint City Safe Space in Belleville, also run by Matdock. The company won the tender for another 25 million rand for 3 years in November 2020, at a time when its so-called safe space was being investigated for severe human rights violations.
They did not have the specialized knowledge and experience on how to deal with street-based communities.
Matdock has denied the allegations, but the investigations which were conducted internally have never been made public, and for the service provider, it remains business as usual.
The fact that we brought this to the city's attention, the Hawks have been involved, their internal forensic investigation unit has been involved, and there has been absolutely no outcome.
Stacey Dawley-Jones runs Stand, an NGO providing treatment for those gripped in the cycle of addiction, trauma and violence.
We are put through a rigorous registration process to ensure that we have all the necessary policies, procedures, protocols in place to ensure that no harm is done to any client that we treat.
But this isn't just about 4 allegedly dodgy tender procurements valued at well over 100 million rand. Currently, there is no legislation providing oversight of the service provision of shelters and safe spaces. So basically, it's open season for any opportunistic business looking to make a buck on the back of the homeless.
It is the new cash cow. There is absolutely no governance.
The Western Cape Department of Social Development acknowledges that companies operating homeless shelters do not even have to be registered with the department, and that there is no legislation mandating good governance at these shelters. It lays the blame at the door of the National Department of Social Development for failing to introduce laws. As for the Human Rights Commission, it has been extremely vocal about Strandfontein, the alleged human rights violations at Paint City, and over the death of Dumisani Jokro. It undertook to take firm action against the city, the service providers, actively support victims, and protect the dignity of the homeless. Yet it too has been accused of not walking the talk.
Every time I approached them and I said, why is the Human Rights Commission not taking appropriate action? And they said they cannot answer this. They have no idea.
The Human Rights Commission acknowledged receipt of Special Assignment's requests for an interview and promised to escalate our concerns. We haven't heard a word since. Cape Town prides itself as a city that cares and works. Indeed, for ratepayers who can afford homes in the city, it does the job. But the growing number of street-based communities, courtesy of COVID and its catastrophic consequences, has become an eyesore for property owners, a cause for property devaluations and a security risk, with crime all too often associated with crime. The city has been accused of weaponizing streets bylaws to not only drive off the homeless, but of criminalizing poverty. The city denies this, but those who do not choose to go to shelters are heavily fined. If they don't pay up, they can be arrested.
The city, they're using ratepayers' money. And I mean, please make sure that if you are getting a service provider, please make sure that the service that they are going to render to the people is it's a comprehensive program, and you need to constantly monitor and evaluate your service provider to ensure that what they are providing to the vulnerable group is sufficient and that there is development.
The province's Social Development Department spends 36 million rand per year funding 27 NGOs supporting the homeless.
There's not a lot of interaction, there's not a lot of engagement, and they just tell you, okay, you are a social service provider, so you need to reach this target, you need to reach that target. So I think when it comes to province, it's really just number-based.
For individuals like Chaz Rogers, the social workers do little to assist with trauma, especially in the case of the recent suicide of Llewellyn Fredericks.
He'd been to them and he just shook his head at me saying, there's nothing that they can do for him, you know. And the point is, the social workers don't take the real time to analyze the situation or the person, you know. They're not reaching out deeper to make a difference in people's lives.
They cannot see behind the substance use. They cannot see behind the trauma. They cannot see behind the marginalization and the mental health disorders.
But there have been productive developments, like the Inkathala conversations that took place over a year ago between the city, service providers, NGOs and homeless communities.
We said to them, guys, we want to know what is happening on the ground. I need to know what is happening on the ground, because the city wants to update a 2010 policy, street people policy, into a strategy that holistically works with homeless people.
And at the Inkathala conversations, we had decided the only thing we agreed upon completely was the housing of the homeless was completely not bent, it was broken. It had to be addressed.
Yet, recently, the Inkathala Conversations released a 400-page report that was scathing about the city's treatment of its homeless. The city says it is reviewing the report.
This caring city does not actually see street-based dwellers as human beings.
Now, street-based communities are doing it for themselves. Formerly homeless himself, Carlos Mosquita heads the Rehoming Collective, run by street-based communities that includes a housing observatory called the Rainbow House and a homeless hub.
You know, our tagline for our house is being, becoming, belonging. Now, being is who we are. You know, whatever state you're in at that point in time. The becoming is the work that we do in order to get to that point. But the belonging depends on society, whether they're going to accept us.
I never had a purpose. Honestly, I didn't know what I was, why I was here. All I knew was I was in a rut. I didn't come easy because I didn't know who to approach to help me so that I can help others. I wanted more than anything in this world. I want the homeless community to feel that they're not hopeless. They're not helpless.
Vulnerable.
And they're not vulnerable, because vulnerable is weak. And homeless people are not weak, they're strong, they're survivors.
It provides more than a roof over their heads. Here, skills are imparted that tap into the creative and constructive potential of street communities. But they have to rely on donations for everything.
We scuttle to pay our rent here. We scuttle whatever we need, we scuttle. It's a nice feeling to always go and ask. We need laptops. We need 3 laptops. We need 2 phones because we're going to have a crisis line and an emergency accommodation line. But this is all stuff that we have to go and ask the public because we don't have the financial aid for it.
Although the city provides expanded public works programs, many street-based communities have skills that transcend basic municipal jobs.
The city has terms and conditions. We don't have terms and conditions. All we want to do is we want to empower people. We want to empower them so that they have their mindsets change. That they want to set goals for themselves. That they want to leave the street.
80% of the people that are still there have not made or achieved any success in any endeavors of their life. They're still there. Here I am 2 years later with my intelligence and my skills being clean, totally sober, and not being given a helping hand.
We took Chaz Rogers to meet the Rehoming Collective to see if his multiple talents could in some way contribute not only to his self-empowerment, but to others.
There's 2 ways to life, a wrong way and a right way. The wrong way is easy. It's an easy way out. And the hard way is the way that will take you to the place you want to go. If you have the resilience.
We can never get back our old lives that we had. But we can carve out a life for ourselves now.
Anything can be done. You must want to do it. Sometimes we need a push.